This is a News 4 special presentation. Tribute to a fallen hero.
This is the funeral cortege of firefighter Anthony Phillips. As it winds its way through Washington on a circuitous route, it will end up at Fort Lincoln Cemetery. For the last couple of hours, funeral services have been underway at Bethesda New Life Gospel Church in Northeast Washington. And just moments ago, the casket of firefighter Phillips was brought out of the church, loaded onto engine number 10, the last engine on which he rode, and the funeral cortege is on its way to the cemetery. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susan Kidd.
And I'm Doug McKelway. This is a News 4 special report. The funeral of firefighter Anthony Phillips. We will bring you coverage of the service and the procession to the cemetery.
Right now, Pat Collins is live outside Bethesda New Life Gospel Church in Northeast D.C., where funeral services ended just a short time ago. Pat?
Susan and Doug, many tears, much sorrow here at the church today. A service that went on for more than 2.5 hours. The arrivals this morning, the arrivals at the New Life Baptist Gospel Church here, and we saw leaders old, leaders new. Mayor Barry was here, former Mayor Barry was here, Mayor Anthony Williams was here. Hundreds of firefighters were here from all up and down the East Coast. This is the scene at the church as the casket was taken away. After the service that lasted 2.5 hours, a number of speeches. We heard from Fire Chief Donald Edwards, who called on people to celebrate the life of Tony Phillips. That's the chief with Tony Phillips' widow, Lisa. She was there with their 6-year-old son, Anthony Jr. You can see him there. He's wearing a baseball cap with the Engine 10 emblem on it. His dad's engine company. Of course, his father, Anthony Phillips, one of 2 firefighters killed over the weekend in a townhouse fire in Fort Lincoln. This is the first of 2 funeral services. Again, speaking at the funeral today, Fire Chief Donald Edwards, who called on people to celebrate the life of Tony Phillips. We'll have that for you in a moment. I want to bring in now Father Sal Criscola, the police and fire chaplain. You were here for the service. Father, your reaction here.
Well, Pat, as you said, it's a difficult day, a day of great pain and sorrow and mourning, but it was also a positive day. The service itself was a celebration of life, a homecoming for this firefighter who gave his life in the line of duty. It was a positive service, and that's what I think the Reverend wanted to leave the message with all the people, that his life here is ended, but his mission has been complete, and he's now at home with the Lord, who he came to know and serve very well.
Father, we're watching the procession now, the funeral cortege, as it moves through the city of Washington. I'm sure a number of people will stop, and it must be something. You've been through this before with other funerals, but in the city there has to be sort of just a pain in the city itself as they see this.
There is, and in this city that sees dignitaries come and go every day, the President of the United States going through the streets of the city, it is somewhat used to motorcades. But this procession is extremely solemn. People will stop, people will salute, people will bow their heads in prayer. You don't hear any horns blowing. They realize what they're seeing, and out of respect for the firefighter, for his family, and for all firefighters, they all stop.
And it sends a message to the firefighters and the firefighters' family.
It does. Many times after the fact, I've spoken to some family members, and they have brought out, did you see that gentleman stop and salute? Did you see that woman on the side who was crying? People that never knew them, never knew this firefighter, but are deeply touched by this event?
I thought at the service today there was a interesting mix. There were people telling stories about his professional life. There were people talking about his personal life. It was most interesting.
It was. And that's what we need to realize. A firefighter is a person, comes from a family, has relatives, parents, spouses, children. And we sometimes forget that. We see them going into fires, we see them in accidents, and we just see them as firefighters. We see them in a uniform. But underneath that uniform is always a person, always a family member, a human being with various sides to his life.
Fire Chief Donald Edwards got up there and talked about how they went to the same high school. He went to Roosevelt High School. They were both native Washingtonians. In fact, he said they both had the same nickname, Sauce. And then the mayor got up and made the story of Sauce, Tony Phillips' nickname, really come to life when he talked about how he came into the firehouse and he came with his own nickname, and they didn't like that, so they gave him Mayonnaise and other nicknames, and finally they settled on Sauce. It was a very moving thing with personal stories and quips, and as well as stories about his professional life.
It was, and it's so true. 99% of the firefighters all have nicknames, but they don't usually give it to themselves. It's given to them.
Father, we're going to move away now, and we're going to go to Mary Alice Salinas, who's at the Capitol watching the cortege as it passes there. Mary Alice.
Let's just tell you about the processional route that the funeral cortege will take as it winds its way to the cemetery. It will head down Minnesota Avenue to Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast. It will then cross over the Anacostia River via the Sousa Bridge, head for the U.S. Capitol, which is where this live shot is seen right now, near the Capitol. The funeral cortege will circle the Capitol, go up Maryland Avenue to Florida Avenue, past Engine Company 10, where Phillips worked. And at Engine Company 10, they will ring a bell that has been placed outside. Of course, that firehouse has been draped in black since the death of firefighter Phillips, and a bell will ring 3 times in groups of 3 as Engine Company 10 passes that firehouse. The procession will then go up Virginia Avenue to New York Avenue to Bladensburg Road, just across the district line, and it will wind up at Fort Lincoln Cemetery in Brentwood in Prince George's County, where he will be interred.
Susan, you said it's a circuitous route, but it is also a mammoth procession. There are literally hundreds upon hundreds of fire apparatus contained in this procession. It is an impressive sight indeed, a measure of the outpouring of sympathy for the fallen firefighter.
Some 1,000 firefighters expected to show up for the services for Phillips today, and also for services tomorrow for Lewis Matthews. About 1,000 firefighters from as far away as Canada, some coming from Chicago, Illinois, some 200 pieces of equipment. And this is Engine 10, which is carrying the body of firefighter Anthony Phillips.
That truck draped in black bunting. It's interesting as this happens, you'll see so many of the firefighters saluting as the procession passes, and you'll also see hundreds upon hundreds of bystanders who are just going about their daily business, stopping to pause. It certainly gives them an idea of just how important, how symbolic, and how meaningful to a society is. Firefighters are to a society like this. To have this kind of pause taken out to remember them is an important societal ceremony and function.
Absolutely. I think it is at times like this one when we stop and think about the very dangerous job that these men and women do. I was speaking earlier to a fire chaplain who talked about how this kind of an event, the death of a firefighter, will really give pause to all firefighters to think about the danger of their job, and hopefully will make us all more aware of the fact that they put their lives on the line every time they go out every day to do their jobs.
Indeed, if anything good can come of the death of these 2 firefighters, it may be that it gives us new appreciation of the risks inherent in their job, whether it's a firefighter or police officers, for instance, I think we all too often take for granted the work that they perform. And there are all kinds of indicators out there of just how stressful their lives really are. I know that police and firefighters, for instance, have much higher divorce rates than the general public do, much higher rates of depression and things like that. These are all manifestations of the huge stress that they face every day in their job.
And yet, how often...
long periods of boredom punctuated by terribly dangerous moments of fear and excitement.
And how often, though, have we heard about this firefighter for whom the services are being held today, how much he loved his job, how much he had wanted to be a firefighter all his life.
It's another trademark of people who enter that profession, I think.
Chris Gordon is standing by live now at the firehouse where Phillips worked. Chris?
Well, right now there are firefighters and members of the community gathered here at the 1300 block of Florida Avenue in Northeast Washington. Engine Company number 6 has a unique honor. They're going to be ringing that bell you were talking about earlier when the procession comes by here. It's called Sounding the Last Alarm. And now back to the procession route. One firefighter told me, we have received lots of love in the last couple of days. It's both a shame and yet a tribute that the community comes to realize how much it values its fallen heroes at a time like this. Not since 1911 have 2 died in the line of service. Today, Anthony Phillips laid to rest, his Engine 10 carrying his casket, coming home here to Engine Company 10 and then on to the Last Alarm Garden on Bladensburg Road. Here you have, as it's going by the U.S. Capitol, this was a request of the personnel of Engine Company 10 that it pass by the Capitol, symbol of what they serve, the people, the offices, the government that they serve. And at Engine Company 10, you have volunteers from Kentland and Landover, Prince George's County, taking the runs today so that all of the personnel from Engine Company 10 can be part of the funeral and the procession. We've had youngsters out here, one dressed as a firefighter, his mom telling me he has 2 heroes, his dad and firefighters. He wants to be one. I've talked to a paramedic who brought his 2 kids. And one of the youngsters, a 9-year-old, says he wants to be a paramedic. The father thought it was important to be here, to pay respect. This is a day of tribute. This is a day of respect. Let's watch. All 54 fire companies throughout the city are participating in the procession. Many are blocking intersections so that the procession can pass, and then they're falling in line. And when it comes home here to engine company number 10, those who are here to pay their respects, those who will ring the last alarm, will then get in their fire engine, number 6, and fall into the procession going on Florida Avenue, up West Virginia, over New York to Bladensburg Road, to the cemetery, Fort Lincoln Cemetery, where the last alarm garden set aside for those who die in the line of duty in public service will receive Anthony Phillips, the first fallen hero, to be buried there. Back to you.
Chris, we know, though, that tomorrow funeral services are going to be held for Lewis Matthews, and he will not be buried in that cemetery. And how is it a matter of choice for fallen firefighters to whether they want to be buried here? Is it open to any member of the fire department?
Yes, Susan, it is now. It's a matter of family choice, and it is being offered free as an honor and a tribute. And the Phillips family felt that Anthony Phillips worked for 7 years to be part of the DC firefighting department. It was his dream. It was what he wanted to do. If he were to die, he wanted to die at the job, so he will be the first to be buried with the honor at Fort Lincoln Cemetery in the last alarm guard.
Chris, it might be valuable to talk about how Anthony Phillips specifically died. I think we all know at this point that the fire in which he died happened last weekend. It was a house fire in a townhome in northeast D.C.
It was in Fort Lincoln, and there was a flashover.
Right.
Members of Engine Company 26 and Engine Company 10 were caught in it, and as we go now live to our location, Engine Company number 10, you have the honor guard passing the home that houses Engine 10, the former home of Anthony Phillips. You will hear very shortly the sounding of the last alarm when Engine 10 comes by, and it will continue, we are told, to the end of the procession.
Chris, you had mentioned that Anthony Phillips had succumbed to that flash. Ultimately revealed that he had died of asphyxiation due to the inhalation of superheated air, soot, and smoke. One can only imagine the conditions inside that building. And you all know that flashovers are a phenomenon which are very, very rare in firefighting, but they do occur, and when they do occur, virtually anybody is at risk of life and limb.
All accounts of that fire have said that it appeared to be a fairly ordinary, routine house fire until that flashover. And we should also mention that there were other firefighters mentioned in that fire, and 36-year-old Joe Morgan remains in critical condition at the Washington Hospital Center burn unit, unable to attend the ceremony today for his fallen brother.
He suffered burns over 60% of his body, and I believe he is still in critical condition, although he has, I think, according to reports, made some improvement. Let's listen in.
There's a certain amount of symbolism, of course, associated with these kinds of funerals, and the last seat on which firefighter Phillips rode on engine number 10 stands empty and draped on that fire engine. Also, at some point today, you will no doubt see a shot of his boots with his helmet on top.
We've just been told that the last vehicle in this procession has pulled away from the church, the Bethesda New Life Gospel Church in Northeast Washington, where the procession began. We've been on the air now for 20 minutes, so that gives you an idea of just how long this procession is, how many vehicles are involved in it. 20 minutes worth of passing.
You were listening to the sounding of the last alarm. Chris, are you still with us?
Susan?
Can you tell me why the bell was sounded in groups of 3?
It is a traditional tribute. I asked the fellow who was given the honor to ring it, Danny Linza, why. He said he didn't know, but that it is a tradition. The department has but one bell. It will be offered for use tomorrow as well. They hope to use it very rarely.
We should remind our viewers of just how rare this occurrence is that you're watching on the screen right now. The last time 2 firefighters died in the District of Columbia from a fire in the line of duty was in 1911. So it has been almost well, more than 80 years since this last happened. I think probably due in large part to the safety of a lot of structures now, building materials. They're all safer than they used to be, of course, but the risks of firefighting still remain. They are unpredictable.
And as we look at these veterans, of course, they are standing there in a very dignified way, and they certainly know the risks of their job, but we certainly have seen a great deal of grief and sorrow. There's a lot of talk about what a big fraternity firefighters make up, how close they are, how they feel each other's pain and losses, and we certainly have seen that throughout this ordeal as the district has mourned the loss of 2 firefighters and others injured.
You can see how it would be such a close-knit fraternity, not only because of the unpredictability of the job, the danger of the job, but they have very unusual schedules, firefighters do, out of necessity, and it takes a tremendous toll on them. I don't know what the D.C. regulations are in terms of scheduling, but a lot of firefighters have 24 hours on and then a few days off after that. It's a schedule that can wreak havoc on your daily functions and your family life, things of that sort. So it tends to breed a great fraternity and camaraderie among firefighters.
Many of these firefighters, we have to imagine, will later today be going to the viewing for firefighter Lewis Matthews. That viewing is from 4 to 9 today. Could be a very long day for many of these men and women. That viewing held 4 to 9 today at St. Paul Baptist Church in Capitol Heights, and we can assume that many of these same grieving firefighters will participate in that viewing today and in funeral services for firefighter Matthews tomorrow.
We mentioned earlier that we hope something good can come from this terrible tragedy, and certainly just the renewed focus on the D.C. Fire Department in this sense is good. There was a number of years there, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, Susan, where we read so many newspaper articles and so many TV news reports of the troubles in the D.C. Fire Department with aging equipment, closing various firehouses, equipment that was not kept up to standards. You watch as this procession passes that there are a lot of good-looking fire trucks, a lot of new pieces of equipment there, and we certainly hope that, at least from a firefighter's perspective, that they are being taken care of better than the news reports would have indicated a few years back.
But I'll tell you what, even with all of that, there is certainly a great deal of pride. There always has been a great deal of pride among those men and women in the job that they do, politics aside. And of course, at funeral services earlier today, many politicians and dignitaries were there paying their last respects. That these men and women have always stood very tall in terms of their efforts, and they're putting their lives on the line, as we've so tragically learned this past week. Interesting how quiet it is as these fire trucks and the funeral procession goes by. People, as the gentleman noted earlier, really aren't honking their horns. Very dignified, very sorrowful.
You may be wondering who's tending the firehouses while this procession is going on. Chris Gordon just mentioned a while back that at Station House number 10, where Anthony Phillips worked, Prince George's County firefighters are watching the station house so that all the members of that particular group could attend this ceremony.
And firefighters from Fairfax County and Montgomery County pitching in across the city. Many of them volunteer firefighters, not paid professional firefighters as we have in the district, but volunteers from across the metropolitan area have stepped up to man firehouses across the district, so that not just those who worked with Phillips and Matthews, but others could be a part of this funeral service and this procession in honor of Phillips.
Let's go to Mary Alice Salinas now, over near the Capitol building. Mary Alice, what are you saying from your perspective?
Mary Alice?
It's interesting, Susan, we'll try to get back to Mary Alice a little bit later. She stepped aside, apparently. You see a lot of children in the groups of people watching from the sidewalks. I saw just a glimpse of a child on a parent's shoulder a while back. Children have a special affinity for firefighters. I think little boys especially. I remember it was just such a thrill when I was a little kid to go to the firehouse. We had one down the street from my house, and actually the DC fire station on MacArthur Boulevard. I used to go down there quite regularly, and the firefighters were always very friendly to us as we go there. They'd show us around, let us sit in the fire truck. I don't know, maybe regulations prohibit that nowadays.
I don't think so, because how many times do you see them bringing their trucks to schools and community parades? And that's true. Children really do have a special place in their heart for firefighters. And we have seen many children dotting this funeral route today, and many at the church today.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. There are many, many stories too, talking about children, how admiring they are of firefighters and people in that position. A lot of kids I have read who have been saved by firefighters in house fires grow up to feel some sort of a special attachment to them throughout their lives. Many of them go on to become firefighters themselves.
And we've heard Philip's wife and mother talk about how much he enjoyed being a firefighter and how much he'd wanted to be a firefighter since he was a little boy. We don't know exactly what time the procession is going to arrive at Fort Lincoln Cemetery, but we imagine this funeral procession will be weaving its way through the city for quite some time. Mary Alice, are you there now?
Yes, I'm here.
The procession's still going by the Capitol, Mary Alice?
I'm having trouble hearing.
Well, we can see that it is. We'll try to get back to you.
Actually, it just wrapped up, as you said. It lasted quite a long time. I'm not sure you were keeping tabs on it, but it just seemed to go on forever here. And there were a lot of emotional scenes here among the spectators. We had, of course, engine companies who are now pulling out from all over the area. This group was from Washington, D.C. D.C. firefighters right here who talked to me about how this is the time when the moment really hits, when the reality of it all really sinks in, and it makes them feel the tremendous loss, even though this happened on Sunday, they feel the tremendous loss. They say it also makes them think about the dangers that they really are in, and that they want to be even more cautious. And they had support lined up all along here on 3rd Street, all along this procession. Really, people came out. Some of them were visitors who told me that they stopped because firefighters are firefighters all over the country. They all do the same job. They deserve their respect, and there's a need for a moment of pause to show what tremendous loss there is and how much danger they're in. We had workers come out of these federal buildings for the same kinds of reasons. Some people were actually shedding a few tears, so you had everyone here very emotionally involved in this process of, above all, wanting to pay their respects to this firefighter and also remember his family. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Mary Alice. We'll get back with you in just a little while. We have some guests with us now. Chaplain Ron Washington is the service chaplain for the Prince George's County Fire EMS Department, and Gail Fegans is the critical stress counselor with the Prince George's County Fire Department. I know that you've been a D.C. policeman. You've been on both sides of the fence as a policeman and now with the fire department. This is a tough day for firefighters all across the area.
It's a very tough day, a very sad day, but at the same time, it's a good day for us in the department to know and understand how much people really care about the firefighters and all of us, and we just are so thankful for that.
Chaplain Washington, we've talked a lot today about that special fraternity, the brotherhood. Maybe that's not the right term in this day and age because we have a lot of women firefighters too. The camaraderie, I suppose, is a better term, of firefighters. What causes that? What breeds that?
Well, I think it's the job itself and the critical conditions that the loved ones have to be under, and the danger of the job. And it's the love of community, I believe, also, not only on the part of the firefighters, but their families. And you said the right word is family. It is not like a family, it is a family.
By necessity, I guess firefighters have to know their communities better than virtually anybody. They have to know the streets, the neighborhoods, the buildings.
They have to know the streets and neighborhoods and how to read a map also. But yes, they do. And they do know the people, and the people know them.
We're looking at video as we're speaking now of the funeral itself, which occurred earlier in the afternoon. And we hope you enjoy these taped pictures of the funeral as the procession is now underway. This is actually a picture of the casket as it's leaving the church.
Ms. Fegans, let me talk to you, because there certainly are a lot of hurdles that firefighters and family members will have to get over now. Surely they live every day with the knowledge of the danger of their jobs. This sort of brings it all to a point, all to a head. How do firefighters, their spouses and parents work through this kind of grief?
I think one of the things that they do is they stay together. They use their family resources, their peers. That's what we do at Prince George's, and it's a national movement, is to have critical incident teams that are mostly peer provided, peers, one peer to another peer, and then they acknowledge that this is a very serious grieving time, and to monitor themselves and their own feelings and their own actions and take good care of themselves. Some practical things like that is to talk to each other, talk to ministers, talk to professionals, do things that we all do that are healthy for ourselves, and then that will support them through their time of grief.
We've talked so much about the kind of stress that firefighters are under, but it's easy to say that. Give some insight into what that stress is and the manifestations of it that the general public might not be aware of.
I think this firefighter's death, there are known major incidents in firefighting professionals. In the profession, that would be the death of a peer is number one, the death of a child is number two, an injury of a fellow firefighter those are the top three. And so that when that bell rings, you know, when they did the honor to the ringing of the bells, when that bell rings, all our firefighters, volunteer and career men and women, that adrenaline is just front and forward.
It's almost like a Pavlovian response.
It's very much that, and that's the stress physiologically on these firefighters and medics of doing that over and over, and because of their training, that qualifies them, that puts them to the alert, that doesn't put them to where they're dysfunctional. It puts them to the alert state.
I'll never forget the site. It was one of my early years in the business of broadcasting, and I had just come back from covering a fire, and it was a house fire where children had been badly burned, and I'll never forget the sight. It stuck with me for weeks and weeks afterwards. Absolutely. Of a firefighter carrying a badly injured toddler out of a house, and you could literally see, maybe I shouldn't say this on the air, but skin hanging from the arms of this poor baby who was not even crying. I think she was so stunned. But that shocking, terrible picture stuck with me, and it was a gruesome thing, which I recall we didn't put on the air because it was just too gruesome. But I thought, imagine if I feel this way. A firefighter's got to pick that child up and has probably had to do it on many occasions.
Absolutely. And that memory that you have, which all of us can have for an event, and that's why the term is called a critical incident, because it's an incident that's beyond the norm. And so that for a firefighter, the death of a colleague, the death of a child, severe injury to a colleague, that becomes stored in our memories very different than other incidents.
Would this be post-traumatic stress disorder? Is that what we're talking about?
That's exactly what we're trying to prevent. So that by calling them critical incidents, having people debriefed and diffused, we have learned that we prevent post-traumatic stress. That from many, many people's hard work and volunteer hours and many, many works across internationally, we've learned that about these incidents because they're so invasive. You remember not only the visual, but the sensation, which is the physical stress response. It's not just, stress is not just a bad day in this term.
We've seen an incredible outpouring of support that firefighters have for one another. And Tony Phillips' wife spoke about it, how she's really been surrounded by a cloak of friendship. What happens when that's over with, when all the funerals are over, all the attention is gone, and the firemen are really left with the difficulty and danger of their job, and the families left again with the knowledge that they're going off every day to a very dangerous job?
Well, I think what happens is the situation that has happened today, it lingers for a while, but I think they get back to, as I hate to say it, it's the term business as usual. The families that have been affected, it will never go away. And every time they see a fire truck or someone visits, and I can tell you this, that Mr. Phillips' widow will not be left alone. I guarantee you the fire department will keep contact with her. But it's a situation where you must go on, life goes on. And those firefighters, male and female, and all, of course, and families know this, that the bell will ring again, and they'll have to go out again. They may not come back again. It's just something that you learn to live with, and it's the love of firefighting that keeps us going and keeps them going. And it will never stop. We are in a service that, you know, you lose lives, you get hurt, and they know that. But it's not going to stop them. We're still going to have recruits, we still have people volunteer, they're still going to sign up, they're still going to love to be firefighters. Still
little boys and girls idolizing firefighters and wanting to be them. We're looking at live pictures now along the funeral route. We're going to show you, I believe momentarily, the Fort Lincoln Cemetery where Phillips' body will be interred.
Pat Collins, you're standing by back at the Bethany New Life Gospel Church. Tell me what you see going on there now.
Well, Doug, the funeral procession has left here. It's been going for some time. and they're breaking down these huge tents they had here for all the overflow crowd of firefighters who came to the service today. There was only room in the church for a few hundred people, and so they set up these tents for firefighters to stand under so they could hear the service on loudspeakers. I'm here with Father Sal, the police and fire chaplain. We heard a number of different kinds of speeches and tributes today, Father. One of the more memorable ones from Fire Chief Donald Edwards, who talked about why we should celebrate the life of fallen firefighter Tony Phillips.
I was overwhelmed by the degree of strength that this lady showed. This is a 26-year-old woman who stood tall, has been standing tall. And my wife told me, Reverend, there's a lot of church in there. That's what she said. She told me. She says a lot of church in there. That was what I sensed on early Sunday morning, sitting up in the Washington Hospital Center. It takes a woman to define those things for us at times. To the many men and women in blue that are seated here, those that are lined up outside, that have come to share our grief, don't grieve for Tony Phillips. Let's celebrate the life of Tony Phillips. This is a celebration. This is indeed a homegoing service for not only a servant of man, but a servant of God. On the night of his death, Tony was running the line for Engine 10. Engine 10, he's running the line for God now. He's riding Engine 10 up there. On Sunday, during the day, I went back to the scene of this tragedy and just surveying the scene in an attempt to see what happened. We don't know what happened. We will attempt to find out. But I looked there out in the parking lot and I saw a female standing off to the side, weeping silently. And she had on the uniform of a firefighter, but it wasn't the District of Columbia. So I went over to her and she identified herself as a member of the Prince George's County Volunteer Fire Department. She was served as a chaplain or assistant chaplain. She said she just had to come. And she gave me a poem that I'm going to read. The author is unknown, but the title is The Measure of a Man. Not how did he die, but how did he live? Not what did he gain, but what did he give? These are the units to measure the worth of a man as a man, regardless of birth. Not what was his station, but had he a heart? And how did he play his God-given part? Was he ever ready with a word of good cheer to bring back a smile, to banish a tear? Not what was his church, nor what was his creed, but had he befriended those really in need? Not what did the sketch in the newspaper say, but how many people were sorry when he passed away? It is evident that Anthony Sean Phillips Sr. filled all of those roles. Anthony, Godspeed. Thank you.
Fire Chief Donald Edwards in the pulpit today, sounding very much, Father, like a reverend himself, as he called us to celebrate the actions of Tony Phillips, his life, and to move on here with him in our heart.
He did, and I know for a fact that the chief is an extremely spiritual man, and has been there from the beginning with the firefighters at the hospital, with the family, and is also emotionally drained. He lost two firefighters, and we still have other firefighters that are recovering. So he needs the strength from above also, and we sometimes forget about the chief, and we talk about the family and the firefighters. The chief is a firefighter also.
tough calls he had to make this weekend after leaving that scene and then going to talk to the family.
Extremely. I mean, he left the fire ground, came to the hospital, checked on his firefighters. There were hugs, there were embraces, there were words of encouragement, and we all knew the most difficult part was ahead, the notification to the families, who at that point did not know that their loved ones were this seriously injured, and in this particular case, their loved one had been called home.
And Father Sal, I remember our new mayor, Mayor Anthony Williams, speaking at the funeral service today. On the personal side, telling that story about how Tony Phillips got the nickname Sauce and how his first few days at Engine 10 developed into that name. Let's hear now from Mayor Anthony Williams.
Firefighters of Engine Company 10 know who Anthony Phillips was. He was a hero, he was a father, he was a husband, he was an outstanding firefighter, and he was a friend. From the day the fresh young firefighter showed up for work sporting his engine jacket, they knew they had a joker on their hands. The jacket read, as I understand it, Hot Sauce. Now, apparently no one had ever bothered to tell Tony that the cardinal rule of nicknames is you're not allowed to pick your own nickname. So for the rest of the week, his name was mayonnaise, mustard, horseradish, ketchup, anything but hot sauce. But Anthony, who eventually settled for the name Sauce, didn't mind the teasing, and he learned to give as good as he got. He found his second home in Engine Company 10. He became a part of the family. He cared about his colleagues, and he shared his life with them. He even sang to them, even when they didn't want to hear it. And he loved sports. In particular, he loved the Dallas Cowboys, but nobody's perfect. You know, Tony once bragged to his friend that after he and some buddies had won a decisive victory in a basketball game, he said, we crushed them dudes, he told his friend, but somehow in telling the story, he left out the fact that he was opposed by 7th graders. But that was vintage Tony, always looking out on the bright side, never discouraged, never down, and never angry. He was one of those people who carry so much joy, so much heart on his sleeve, it can't help but rub off on others. One of the recipients of that joy was a young man from the neighborhood named Jabbar. Jabbar had been coming around the fire station for years like many young kids, and when Tony met him, he took the young man under his wing. Tony was a role model, and he was an understanding friend. He made an impact on Jabbar through the power of his caring and through the size of his heart. Tony's children who have lost their own father are going to need that same kind of love and support from all of us. Our community has a responsibility to these children, not only to be role models and friends in a time of need, but also to help them keep the memory of their father, alive. Anthony Jr. and Arzell, you'll always know your father was a hero. He was an important man, and he was willing to make the most profound sacrifice anyone can make. To Lisa, we can only express our gratitude to you on behalf of the people of our city and of our community. We will never forget what your husband did. And Mrs. Saunders, there is no greater pain. There's no greater pain in this earth than saying goodbye to a child. I know that words can't express the grief that you feel. The people of this city owe you a debt that cannot be repaid, because you raised a fine man. You raised a man of compassion and love. You raised a hero. So we will not forget this man. Tony has left this life, but his spirit will live on in the lives that he touched. It began in the firehouse as the firefighters consoled one another. It's continued in this church and must go on tomorrow. And as Steny Hoyer has said, day after and day after and day after. The book of John tells us that there's no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. No greater love. That's the love that Tony Phillips showed every day. It's the love and commitment that all our men and women in uniform give to us as they put their lives on the line to make our community safe. And so on this day, as we wish this hero peace and we wish him Godspeed, let us say a prayer for Tony, for his children and for his family, and for all those who served, and for all those who risked their lives for us. On behalf of a great city and on behalf of a great community, thank you, Tony. Thank you. God bless.
Those are the words of Mayor Anthony Williams in his eulogy for the fallen firefighter Anthony Phillips. The funeral procession has now arrived at Fort Lincoln Cemetery in Brentwood, Maryland. These are live pictures of the cemetery that you're looking at right now.
Engine number 10 has just pulled up. They will unload the casket from the engine. I believe they're doing that now, and begin the services there at Fort Lincoln. Took about how long, Doug? More than
50 minutes, probably.
Almost an hour for that large procession to wind its way through the city.
Gail Fegans, I'll ask you, what is the process for grief counseling at times like this? I don't know what the procedure is in the D.C. Fire Department, and you may not either, you're with Prince George's, but is there a procedure in place to offer counseling for those who choose it or want it?
Absolutely. In Prince George's County, and I'm very sure that the district has it as well, as they have, usually under the auspices of an employee assistance counseling services. Police sometimes call it psychological services. That most large departments have an internal resource that's available for counseling. They also have peer teams. We have peer teams, peer support, that if someone would just rather talk to another firefighter, another medic, someone who's been there, someone who's done that, that's available. Just for us, it's just an accessing. You could either access it through the communications office or through our office number.
And as we get set to watch the family approach the burial area here, I know you were saying during the break that there are resources for families.
Absolutely. With our county, all the services that are offered to the employees and to the volunteer firefighters are available to the families as well. You know, it is very much a family organization, and services are offered to the entire family. I know I was thinking there's an association, I think was started by a fallen police officer's wife several years ago for that ongoing support from a peer, again, you know, someone who has lost a husband, a son through the public safety services.
There was an interesting, I'm curious your perspective about this, an interesting op-ed piece, I think it was in the New York Times a couple weeks ago, by an eminent psychiatrist, Sally Suttel, and she said, in this time we're seeing a lot of grief counseling with the Columbine situation, many other situations that don't come to the top of my mind right now. But she said there seems to be a process of injecting grief counseling instantly without recognition that people have different ways of grieving. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that's absolutely true, and I've been in the field of grief counseling for over 20 years now, so I've seen society and cultural change with that. I mean, I can remember doing that before there was such a thing as a hospice. And so I do think that you have to be very, very respectful of the family and the traditions. And some families are very private, you know, so that you just want to let them know. Some people will strictly use their ministers and their church community. And so that you don't want to force that. But I also do think that education about grief had to happen because culturally it was put behind the door. And so we had to bring it back out in the front again. And as people are being forced to deal with grief at younger and younger ages, I mean, I can remember teaching a course and there was college students in there and none of them had had a grief. You know, no one in their family had died because their grandparents, their parents, and so then when you get a serious situation where you've got to help.
Chaplain Washington, I'd like to get your perspective on that too real quick. We're going to go to James Adams momentarily, but I'm sure as a minister you've got your own perspective on that.
Yes, we work closely together, and often people do seek Christian or religious comfort in times of grief. And that's where we come in as chaplains in the fire department. And, they will call for us, and we will go, and of course we'll minister to them too. So they are well covered with that. They do handle grief differently. Some people want to just pray, and that's what we do with them. Some people want to read the Bible. That's what we do with them. And each case is different. but they have to be ministered to in some way or another, and that's what we do. And by the way, we continue to follow that up. We are sort of the chaplains of sort of in the field. We visit every station, and we visit the families, not just the stations, but we will also visit the families. And of course, whenever we can help them there, we'll do that.
We're looking at live pictures now of Fort Lincoln Cemetery, where the body of firefighter Phillips has now arrived. It's going to take some time to get all of the people gathered around the gravesite. As long as the funeral cortege is, I would imagine the entire thing has not yet pulled into the cemetery, and of course there are hundreds and hundreds more people there than they are able to accommodate there at the gravesite. You heard Pat say earlier at the church there had to be tents outside for the overflow of firefighters who had come. You see now the firefighters standing at attention around the coffin. It has not yet been unloaded from the fire truck. James Adams is standing by live there at the cemetery. James?
Well, Susan, as you pointed out, the procession is quite large. Officials here tell me that they expect to wait 15 to 20 minutes before they begin the interment ceremony here. Out of respect for the family, they don't want to keep the family waiting here. We expect, however, several hundred firefighters to make it to the last alarm garden. This garden, this lawn area, was dedicated in April. Ground was broken then, and firefighters tell me they had no idea that in such a short period of time that it would be used. A memorial patio is slated to go up here. The names of fallen firefighters and EMS personnel will be etched in plaques here. As you get a look at the honor guard, representatives from around the region, Howard County, Fairfax County, Anne Arundel, Prince George's, Baltimore City, Arlington, Richmond, Metropolitan D.C. Police here as well. Once the casket leaves Engine 10 and comes to the covered pavilion area here, the interment ceremony will begin, and there will be the last alarm ceremony, which is cherished by firefighters. There will be a reading then that tells it all. You'll hear a battalion chief say or recite that throughout most of history, the life of a firefighter has been closely associated with the ringing of a bell. As he began his hours of duty, it is the bell that started it off. Let's listen in as the color guard comes to attention. Firefighters also, as we await the beginning of the ceremony, remind us that they are among our most trusted and admired professionals, that our national memory oftentimes is etched with memories of Chris Fields, you recall, for example, carrying that baby from that disaster site in Oklahoma. But their profession is equated with respect, admiration, and public trust. Just a day or two ago, when that black powder truck overturned on the Beltway, firefighters there first. When it's a drowning, firefighters are there. A cat in a tree, firefighters are there. So today, as they lay one of their own to rest, they also ask us to remember their importance to us in life and society. One firefighter told me, in the words of Teddy Roosevelt, "No man is worth his salt who is not ready at all times to risk his body, his well-being, and his life in a great cause. And he says, every day our people risk their lives and their bodies in the most noble cause on the face of this earth, protecting the lives and property of others. They want us to remember those words as firefighter Phillips is laid to rest. Because of the newness of this garden, after the ceremony, his remains, his casket will be taken to a nearby mausoleum, and he will be interred later.
James, it's Doug here in the studio. Has the family arrived yet?
The family is here. They're at the foot of Engine 10. And once again, fire officials say they were going to wait a brief 15, perhaps 20 minutes to allow some of the dignitaries to arrive. Then they will begin the ceremony.
It's a difficult thing for a lot of those guys to hold their attention this long. What's the weather like out there, James? Is it oppressive heat or comfortable?
The firefighters were actually blessed today with very kind weather. Just a soft breeze blowing here. So many of them introspective, and I've had so many conversations with so many firefighters who talk about the conversations they've had or the moments of silence that they have had with their family members in light of this most recent tragedy.
James, I don't know if you could see it or not, but we just had a shot poised high above the cemetery there. I believe that's a camera on top of one of our live trucks, on top of the extendable mast there. And it's really the first glimpse that we have had of the casket on top of that fire truck, on top of engine number 10 there. Interesting perspective. Maybe we can get a look at that shot again. Is that possible?
I believe we can. The casket, as I understand, is surrounded by members of Engine Company 10.
James, you talked about the gentle breezes. We can make those breezes out from that mast swaying back and forth. That's why the picture swivels a little bit.
And of course, this whole scene will be repeated again tomorrow as Lewis Matthews is laid to rest. Lewis Matthews, 29 years old, of Mitchellville, killed in the same accident as firefighter Phillips. He will be buried tomorrow. Funeral services at St. Paul Baptist Church in Capitol Heights. And as we mentioned before, 36-year-old Joe Morgan is still hospitalized with critical injuries in the burn unit of the Washington Hospital Center. And the chaplain has told me that he spoke with him just this morning. He, of course, too seriously injured to attend the services today. But you did speak with him this morning.
Yes, I went and spoke with him. I prayed with him. His sister was there, and she was, of course, understandably upset. But, you know, Joe called for a board, and they have him hooked up where he can write. And
he's unable to speak because of his injuries.
To speak, but he could nod his head, and he wrote a message to me, very encouraging. And encouraging me and encouraging her, and I think he's recovering well.
What did he say, Chaplain? Can you share that with us?
Well, his sister was, you know, again, understandably upset, and he just wrote a note. He said that my sister is taking good care of me, and she's upset, but you know, she doesn't mean any harm, and she's going to be all right.
Again, this may or may not be something you want to share, but what are the nature of his injuries? Are they disfiguring injuries? Are they something that he's going to have to deal with for the rest of his life, assuming he makes a recovery?
Well, I'm not a medical man, so I don't know, but he has burned over 60% of his body. He's recognizable. He looks, as for what happened, I think he looks very well. And, you know, to say he looks good, considering what happens, I think he looks very good.
Certainly a blessing that his injuries are no more serious than they are. Right now, the coffin is being unloaded from engine number 10. Members of Phillips Company are unloading the casket, and they will begin the service there at the cemetery momentarily. James, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
What is the order of the service here at the cemetery?
Well, following the casket resting on the pedestal, we expect a parade rest in order of arms on the part of the honor guards, and then the minister will begin the interment service. There will be the traditional presentation of the flag. Lieutenant Watson will retrieve the flag and present it to the wife of firefighter Phillips. There will also be a flyby from the U.S. Park Police. And then the last alarm ceremony ring reading and the traditional ringing of the bell. It will be struck 3 times with a 10-second pause in between each strike. The first strike representing the awakening of a firefighter in the morning. The second strike symbolizing a call, a run. And then the third strike is going home. Family members are still assembling, and we expect very shortly the service to begin.
Quite a long day of services since 10 o'clock this morning when services first began at the Bethesda New Life Gospel Church. Quite a long day for the family and all of the firefighters who have come out to pay their last respects. I suspect they don't mind, though. It's their way of showing their tribute and their honor to their co-worker.
It's been a long, long week. It's been almost a week now since the two firefighters died. And you can only imagine the strain on the family, not only the loss of their loved ones, but it's not an easy time. I'm sure, Chaplain, you can understand that, but you have a lot of visitors. There's a certain stoicism, I suspect, that probably has to be maintained throughout all of these official duties. And maybe I'm thinking at this moment where the casket is lowered to the ground, it is a time probably for a lot of families when they really do come face to face with the reality of what has happened.
That is one of the most difficult moments, when the casket is lowered and some tradition they throw dirt and they put the flowers on the casket. The realization sets in, the realism sets in, and of course, understandably, that's when you have really the bravest of them break down, that is, mm-hmm. and because it's at that moment they realize that it's all over.
We're going to go back to the funeral service held earlier this morning at Bethesda New Life Gospel Church and listen to the comments of Steny Hoyer.
Fire can burn the body and suck the breath from our lungs, but it cannot still our souls. The second love of his life was his family, Lisa and his two young sons. I saw, and Eleanor saw, as we sat here, Mr. Mayor and Linda, the family come by and others come by and hug Lisa and hug the children and hug the mom. Many of us have been there on the day of the funeral. Many of us have been there even a couple of days after. But Lisa, as we hug you today and hold you today and lift you up and share your grief and sorrow, let us all commit that, as I know the fire service family always does, that we'll be there next week, amen, and next year, amen, and next century.
Again and again, we are told that firefighter Phillips loved his work. We are indebted to these brave young men who love the work of firefighting and who, unlike us, neither fear nor shun the danger, but rush to conquer it. We must not forget that 5 were injured, 2 seriously, and that 2 have died. This morning, we give thanks for the young, loving life of Anthony Phillips. We honor him for his courage and his sacrifice. But in remembering firefighter Phillips, we are especially mindful of the men and women of the department he has left behind to carry on his work of confronting danger whenever and wherever it appears. To properly remember firefighter Anthony Phillips is to remember the members of his department and their indispensable mission, the debt we owe him and the debt we surely owe to them. Thank you.
Those were comments of District Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton and earlier Congressman Steny Hoyer this morning at funeral services for firefighter Phillips. This is a live shot now of the cemetery where the internment ceremony is underway.
The ceremony is just getting underway. Prayer right now being given. following the prayer and the presentation of the flag, we'll again have the last alarm ceremony. And I wanted to share with you, if I could, again, just what will be read during then. Very touching ceremony. The chaplain or a department member will read the following. Throughout most of history, the life of a firefighter has been closely associated with the ringing of a bell. As he began his hours of duty, it is the bell that started it off. Throughout the day and night, each alarm was sounded by a bell, which called him to fight fire and to place his life in jeopardy for the good of his fellow man. And when the fire was out and the alarm had come to an end, the bell rang 3 times to signal the end. That passage will be read during the ceremony. The color guard will present arms, and the bell will be struck 3 times. The bagpipes as well. Here today, the arrival song you heard was Going Home. Again, representing the regional effort here, the Emerald Society from Prince George's County Police. 17 years together. Yes, the members from D.C. were among them. The tenor drummer came from New Jersey to take part in. Following the ceremony, there will, of course, be the playing of Amazing Grace, which is also tradition at firefighter funeral services. And again, as we look at pictures of firefighters standing here, and as the ceremony moves forward, I was told another story that reflects the importance of what they do. Engine Company 15, just about this time last year, a mother and her little boy walk up to the engine company and ask for a Lieutenant Douglas, and he's introduced as the man who delivered you. The little boy says, but Mom, he's a fireman. These firefighters, at this very solemn moment, want us to remember those kinds of stories and the role they play in our lives.
We've talked a great deal about the community that will surround the Phillips family now, and we should tell you that there is a memorial fund for firefighter Phillips. He has 2 young sons, leaves behind a young wife. If you are interested in contributing to that memorial fund, you can write to the Anthony Phillips Memorial Fund in care of Nations Bank, 7515 Annapolis Road, Landover Hills, Maryland, and the zip code is 20785. That is the Anthony Phillips Memorial Fund in care of Nations Bank, 7515 Annapolis Road, Landover Hills, Maryland, 20785.
It has been said that much of the ceremony today at the Bethesda New Life Gospel Church in Northeast Washington, where the service took place, was a celebration of Anthony's life. We're going to interrupt that comment briefly to take a look at the Park Police flyby at the cemetery.
A beautiful summer day and another symbolic recognition of the sacrifice made by firefighter Anthony Phillips.
As I was saying, much of the ceremony today was a celebration of Anthony's life, and I think that was nowhere more evident than in the music at the ceremony today.
We're going to listen in now for the combined choir of the New Life Gospel Church. Again, we'll tell you tomorrow, this will all go on again for firefighter Lewis Matthews, and the firefighting community is praying for firefighter Joe Morgan, who was critically injured in that same fire. We want to leave you now with some of the music from today's funeral service for Anthony Phillips.
And thanks for staying with us this afternoon.
I come to shout for joy. Joy, joy, joy. Joy, joy, joy.